Okay, so we're going to get started by reading a passage from Psalm 74. It's Psalm 74, verses 12 through 17. You may have looked at the title, Raiders of the Creation, and we're like, okay, we're going to talk about creations. Wait, no, he's going to Psalms. Why isn't he going to Genesis 1? Well, we are going to get to Genesis 1, but really, the thing is that there's all these passages in the Psalms about creation. There's Psalm 8, there's Psalm 74, there's Psalm 104, other ones as well. I just think that it's pretty sad that we're not getting a lot of our creation theology from the Psalms as well as from Genesis. It's really really a bummer for me. Yeah, because I think we ought to do it. Anyway, we're in Psalm 74. We're reading that. Okay, so Psalm 74, verses 12 through 17. Yet God is my king, the ancient one, who works deeds of deliverance in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. You broke open springs and torrents. You dried up ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day, yours also the night. You have prepared the light and the sun. You have established all the boundaries of the earth. You have made summer and winter. Okay, and so we're going to talk more about that. But first I want to talk about a friend of mine. Her name is Diane. She is not my wife. Her name is Diane, although I have to say, actually, her name isn't Diane. Her name is something else, but I don't want to put that live on YouTube because it's not really appropriate. Anyway, so she was homeless for a number of years and ended up getting off the street. She got some help. She motivated herself. She got up off the street and everything was good. She got an apartment. Some of her kids, adult children, were staying with her. That was great. And she was staying, one of the people she was staying with their son. Her son was working. He was doing well, and they were able to pay rent. And then he ended up having a kid, and she had a grandchild. And that's just fantastic. She's so happy, just overjoyed with her new grandchild. And then about a month after they have this baby, her son went out at night, and 3 men approached him and shot him and killed him immediately. He died immediately. This was really hard on my friend Diane. Really, really hard. She took it really, really hard. It was difficult. She was in such grief at losing her son. It was difficult for her to really provide support for her new grandkid. And she ended up going in, and my friend Diane ended up going back out on the street and staying in her car. Again, she couldn't keep up on the rent. Now, the police caught the men immediately. There were 3 men who did this. They caught them right away, just within hours, honestly. And then they were put on trial. It took about a year for them to go on trial. The last person was put on trial about 2 weeks ago, or his trial finished about 2 weeks ago, and he was sentenced. And all that time, Diane was just so upset. So had such trouble. She can't. She's just wanting. She's under such grief that she wants them to feel some of the sorrow, some of the pain that she is feeling. And I know that she seriously considered the death penalty for them, and it was really difficult for her to deal with this. And it is right for her to be angry. They took away her son. They took away, and she still has not recovered from that. She's still in grief, and she still is unable to get the help that she needs. And so, yeah, she thought about the death penalty, and she thought about whether is there a just solution for these men who have basically taken away her life and taken away her son. Is there any justice for her? And her prayers and her concerns and her desire for God to have vengeance on these three people is very similar to what's going on in Psalm 74. In Psalm 74, the context of what the psalmist is talking about is the destruction of Jerusalem. At this time, the Babylonians came, they surrounded Jerusalem, they blocked them in so that way they couldn't receive any food, and the people ended up slowly starving over a long period of time, starving to such a degree they were watching each other starve, watching their children, family members starve, and they would even eat children, eat their own children. Right there. Sometimes they would argue about whose children they were going to eat. It was horrendous. It was a horrible, horrible situation. And then the Babylonians came in and destroyed, decimated the city. So that way there were no walls left. The temple was completely crushed. The entire city was just flat. People lost their homes, people lost their livelihoods, large groups of people were forced out of Israel and forced to live out in Babylon. It was a horrendous, evil situation that the Babylonians called. And the psalmist is going, so God, I need you to do something. I demand that you do something about this. Take care of them, destroy them, just crush them. I don't leave any of them left. So he's looking for vengeance. He's looking for a violent response to this horrible thing that they had done to them. And of course, they're not the only city that happened to. There's plenty of others that did that as well. But then the question is God that kind of God? Is God the kind of God who would do that to his enemies? And so he looks in his Bible, he looks to ancient times. And this is ancient times to 586 BC, which is way ancient for us and for back then. And so I'm thinking, well, what is ancient for them? Well, he could be talking about the time of Moses. So perhaps he's talking about the 10 plagues, because that's definitely a destruction upon enemies. But no, I mean, in the text, he's looking at maybe dividing the sea. Oh, so maybe he's talking about the Red Sea. But then he talks about like crushing sea monsters and other things. That just doesn't seem right. And then later on, he talks about preparing the light and the sun and making summer and winter. We go, oh, wait a minute. No, he must be talking about creation. Yeah, he's talking about creation. Well, what exactly is going on here? If he's talking about creation, what is he talking about? Let's take a look. Okay, so Genesis chapter 1, right at the beginning. You just go to your Bible, go to the beginning, open up chapter 1. There you are. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And most of the time we're thinking, okay, well, this is a summary of statements that are coming up later. We get the summary statement, and then after that, we get to find out the details about how he did that. So God is creating the heavens and the earth. However, we kind of have a problem. We have a problem with the second verse. The second verse says, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. Well, the earth means that we're not talking about the initial creation of the earth. Now, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about that God created all things in the earth and the heavens from nothing. But here, we already have something. The earth is already there. The earth already exists right here. And so it's not talking about the initial creation of the earth, because the earth is already there. There's the earth, and it is covered with darkness and with water. That's what the surface of the deep means. That means you've got the earth, and then it's covered with darkness and covered with water. And so it is formless and void because the water and the darkness makes it so that way it isn't really solid. It doesn't have a solid shape. It's moving. All right. And so what is actually going on here? It's talking about, when you're talking about the waters covering the earth, or the seas of the deep covering the earth, it is actually talking about a god called Yam, in which it's a god that is the actual real enemy of God. A lot of times we think that Satan is an enemy of God, sometimes, but the fact is that Satan a lot of times, more often than not, is working for God in the Bible, not doing something, not actually opposing God, but trying to work for God in a really weird way. But the sea is actually an enemy of God in many places in the Bible. The sea is a force of chaos, a force of destruction, especially trying to destroy and kill all of humanity. Just a horrible, tremendous force that nobody can control. And so here we have the earth, and the earth is God's creation. We already know that God created the earth, and then the earth is covered in darkness and covered in with the ocean, because the ocean is actually God's enemy. And so the ocean is taking over God's creation. Darkness and the sea are taking over God's creation. And so when Psalm 74 is talking about that, he's talking about creation. He's talking about God acting against his enemies who have taken over creation, his enemies, the sea and the darkness. That's what's actually going on there. And so Psalm 74 says, see, I remember that you crushed the darkness. You crushed Leviathan, one of the sea monsters that are the kind of the supporting things of the sea, what do they call that? Anyway, one of the minions of the sea. Leviathan is this huge, horrible creature that eats up ships, and God is crushing his heads. And so God, just like you did with those ancient enemies, that's what I want you to do with the Babylonians. I want you to take care of them and crush them. But the problem is that if we look at Genesis 1, it isn't exactly the same kind of thing. At least the whole tone of it is really kind of different. Let me read it, and see if you agree with what I'm saying. All right, so Genesis 1, starting at verse 3, 4. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was morning and evening the first day. So God, first of all, before he tackles on the sea, his enemy, the sea, he's working on darkness. Darkness is a force. And darkness is covering the whole earth, and God says, darkness, where is light? You can't have darkness without light. And the original creation, the way the creation is supposed to have darkness and light. So God says, light, come over here. Now, darkness, I want you to listen to me. You have not been a good boy. You've been a very, very naughty boy. You have been taking all the things that I told, and you are supposed to share the earth with light. You're not supposed to have it all by yourself. And so light, come over here. Light, here you go. This is your part. This is your time. And this time is called day. Darkness, this is your time, and it's called night. Okay, now you guys share. You're not allowed to take over each other's places. So darkness, I'm talking to you. Don't take over the time that is supposed to be for light now. You hear? Otherwise, I'm going to have to spank you. This is kind of the way it is that God is just saying, well, darkness, you're taking over too much. You're being too greedy. You need to share. So I'm going to put a border, put a limit down on what it is that you're able that you're able to do. You're only allowed a certain amount of time, and light gets the other amount of time. And that's how, and that is how that's going. So notice that God is not destroying darkness. God isn't actually doing what Psalm 74 said. Instead, he's telling darkness that he just doesn't get all the earth. Okay, then God focuses on the waters, and he divides the waters twice. He divides the waters from waters in the earth and waters in the heavens, and puts an expanse there. It says waters. Okay, some of you are going to have to go up over here. You know what? You cannot have too much power in one place. You're trying to lock it all into one place. You're not allowed to do that. Here, put some of you up here, up above, and some of you on the earth. Okay, and then we're going to put some space in between, so that way you don't get to be all together again. All right, that's the way it's going to work. And then God says, now also waters on the earth, you're not sharing, just like the darkness. You need to share. Open up. Okay, now see, there's the land. The land is there now. Water, you get this part of the earth. Land, you get this part of the earth. Water, don't be covering up the land. You're not allowed to do that. You have to share. It's just like a parent. A parent sees that that one sibling has taken their cookie and taken their sibling's cookie as well, and they're trying to eat both of them. The parent comes in and says, "No, you have to share. You've got to." And takes the cookie away and gives it to the other sibling and says, "Look, you guys share. Look, you don't be taking your sister's cookies. You're not allowed to do that." And so in Genesis 1, God is not actually so much destroying enemies as giving each one space, saying that, recognizing that, you are all my creation and I want space for all of you. So you get this space and you get this space. There isn't so much crushing or destroying, but there is, God is forcing them to share. That's what he's doing. Okay, so I have 4 lessons that I want us to learn from this. That doesn't mean that there's only 4 lessons from this, but I have 4 lessons that I want to share, okay? So first of all, when scholars talk about and reading Genesis 1, they say that this is a mythic text. They're not joking. I mean, there are gods and goddesses and powers and going back and forth and lead powers and lesser powers and all that. This is a mythic text. That's the way that it's written. That's the way that it's presented. A lot of times in translations, we don't see it as well because some of the words that are translated don't seem as mythic. But if we had, instead it being called sea, we had it called Yam, maybe we might have a better idea of what's going on there. But it doesn't matter. That is a mythic text. And so there's a lot of people who think that it can fit with science. Well, mythic texts and science texts don't work very well together. They're not supposed to work very well together. The point of them are very different. The point of this text is to show God's power and authority over really frightening gods and goddesses in the world, that God has this power over them. It isn't trying to present a scientific text. I had a Bible professor say to me, the problem with creationists isn't that they take the Bible too literally. It's that they don't know the Bible well enough. They're not actually looking at what the Bible says and the context in which it's being written, the genre in which it's being written. They just don't understand that kind of a nuance. And so trying to force scientific findings into Genesis 1 actually does damage to the Bible. It actually hurts the Bible. It's much better to read it for what it says, and then we can gain truth and knowledge from the genre that it's supposed to be, which is myth. Doesn't mean, myth, of course, doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it's written in a certain way so that the way the truth is presented in a certain context. Okay? Second thing that I want us to point out, want us to recognize here, that a lot of us call the original sin the eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. However, in the Bible, that's not the original sin. The original sin is greed. It is taking over what it is, taking over all of which you should only have some. It is not sharing with others what you're supposed to share. It is keeping it all for yourself when it's supposed to be shared with others. And this is interesting because greed is a major sin all throughout the Bible. All throughout the Bible, this is something that is talked about again and again and again, from the very beginning to the very end. This is a major sin in the Bible, and yet in a lot of churches, greed is said, well, yeah, that's a sin, but it's not that big of a deal, and we're not going to really think too badly of you if all you are is greedy. No, this is the major sin in the Bible. This is it. Being greedy, trying to keep stuff for yourself when it ought to be shared with other people, so that way there is poverty and just all kinds of really bad things, and it disrupts order and creates chaos. It is greed that creates chaos. We need to recognize that greed is the major force that is destroying the world today, just like it did at the time of creation. Okay, another thing that we need to recognize is that God is not interested in destroying his enemies. We talked about that. When God creates someone or something, he doesn't want it destroyed. He created it in order for it to exist, in order for it to thrive and live and do well. Sometimes he has to punish, but that doesn't mean, but it's more like a timeout, or more like okay, you have to be over here where you're not going to hurt anybody. It's not a destruction. That's just not what God does. Okay, like in Psalm 104, another psalm that talks about creation, it says, God has a plan for the sea. It says, there is Yah, the great and powerful, in which are swarms without number. Animals, both small and great. The ships move along her. And Leviathan, which you have formed to sport in her. Leviathan isn't even in this text. Leviathan isn't even a monster. It's an animal that loves to play and frolic. And Yam is a force that is being used for the benefit of humanity and for the benefit of the creatures that God placed in Yam. That's a very different kind of presentation than in Psalm 74, where you see Yam being torn asunder and crushed and all sorts of bad, nasty things and veins in the teeth. Okay, finally, I just want to say that the writer of Psalm 74 has a very different perspective on the same text than Psalm 104 or Genesis 1, the same story. Psalm 74 is looking at this story from the perspective of the horrors that he has just been through. He has just suffered tremendously at the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians. And all he can think about at that time is getting vengeance on the Babylonians. And so he is reinterpreting the creation story to be a story of destruction of God's enemies, where God is in his fury and wrath is tearing his enemies apart. But we see in Genesis 1 and we see in Psalm 104 that that's not the way that the story is supposed to go. I honestly believe that Psalm 74 isn't just a straightforward reading of the creation story, but it is a reading through the suffering that he is going through. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that the reason that Psalm 74 is included there is to say, yeah, we can read the Bible through our suffering, and that's okay. It's all right to read the Bible through our anguish and to do that. But we need to remember that God is not a person who is interested in destroying any of his creation. That's not what he wants to do. He always wants to redeem. He doesn't want to destroy. And so I think that's really important for us to remember. So if we get to a place where we see God destroying, or God being a person who is not loving his own creation, it's understandable to do that for a while. But we need to remember that in the end, God is love. That's who God is. God is love. And when we start reading the Bible in a way that takes us away from God's love of all creation, then I think that we are missing the point. And we may read the Bible through our anguish or through our fear for a period of time, but that's our own perspective. That's not the truth. The truth is God is love, always. I just want to tell you one more thing about my friend Diane, who lost her son that we talked about at the beginning here. It's been more than a year since the killing of her son, and all the folks who killed him has been put in jail. And I can see that she's moved away from vengeance. When the last person was put in jail, she says, it doesn't matter, because in the end, it doesn't bring my son back. I think now she's in the place where she can no longer seek vengeance from God or vengeance from the justice system, but instead recognize that the God that she needs right now is a God of healing and a God of love. And I just pray that God allows her to heal. And I pray that God gives her the strength to be able to receive his love and his grace in her terrible circumstances. All right. May the Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace.